The Treasurer is heading to the United States this week for key economic meetings. He says it's a critical time to take the temperature of the global economy ahead of his second budget early next month. Let's bring in independent economist and budget expert Chris Richardson. Chris, do you think it is a good call? I guess it's a no-brainer for Jim Chalmers to attend the G20 finance ministers meeting.
Yes, and there is a bunch of bad news around the world. The fastest increase in interest rates the world has ever seen is bringing economies to heel, notably in the US, also in Europe, where energy prices are a particular challenge. That combination means that the world is slowing. That's a problem for Jim Chalmers, but to be fair, his budget bottom line is actually looking better rather than worse.
Yeah, that's due to the boost in commodity prices, is that right?
Yeah, look, commodity prices are not as strong as they were, but they are miles stronger than the stunningly conservative numbers that were built into the official forecast. So the government brought down a budget or mini budget at the end of October. That was, for example, assuming that thermal coal prices would fall 86% between then and now. They overdid it. That means there's rather more money in the kick than perhaps the Treasurer is otherwise talking about.
Now, he is referring to the IMF outlook, which suggests the worst global growth forecasts in 3 decades. The full interview with Jim Chalmers I've done with him is coming up a bit later in the program, about half an hour from now, and I asked him, are they saying it's worse than the GFC and even the COVID downturn by that assessment, Chris? What's your read?
And those official forecasts are basically saying that the world tends to be slow to recover from a banking crisis, and the US and Europe have had a bit of a banking crisis. Having said that, if you're Australia, you would much prefer to be facing today's outlook for the world economy, let alone the Australian economy, than happened during COVID or, for that matter, happened during the global financial crisis. They were big downturns and they were really painful. This is a challenge for Australia, but maybe not as big as those we've seen in times past.
I also asked the Treasurer about the low and middle income tax offset. The opposition is having a crack, saying that they should have kept it on as a cost of living relief, but this was a commitment and a policy put in place, the timing of this, by the former Treasurer, Mr Frydenberg.
Yeah, and both sides took the same policy to the election, that this money would be disappearing now. And I think it's the right thing to do. To be clear, these taxpayers will keep the tax cut that they originally got a few years ago. It's essentially the doubling up or double and a bit, as it eventually turned out to be. It's that bit that's disappearing. But it is, I suspect, news that many in Australia would be surprised by. They're not necessarily following the budget quite as closely as some do. And the difference is really big bucks. You're talking an average refund. Most people get it July, August, September. This year's refund will be on average $600 less than last year's. Or in other words, if you're thinking of cost of living pressures, that's a pretty big one.
So that's the kitchen table outlook, but the RBA, the board table, the Reserve Bank, they'd be quite pleased with this call because it takes, upwards of $11 billion out of the economy.
And that's what the Reserve Bank is trying to do, take money out of the economy to slow the economy down, to bring inflation down so that interest rates can be no longer have to rise. The rough trade-off, if, for example, the government were to keep this tax offset going at the level it is, then other things equal, you would expect the Reserve Bank to be raising interest rates about 0.5% more than they're otherwise likely to. Or in other words, there is no easy trade-off here. It's the classic problem around tackling cost of living. Because the government is going to do something by hitting taxpayers, that means the Reserve Bank won't be hitting borrowers quite as hard through interest rates.
And finally, I'll let you go, but on that issue, are we going to get that soft landing? Are the rate rises near their peak? How do you see things unfolding over coming months?
They are near their peak. Australia had less of a burst on inflation, less of an increase in interest rates, less of a slowdown in our economy, though some of that's artificial. We're obviously getting a big boost in population growth. But by and large, the problem's been a bit smaller in Australia, and we've had to hit it with a hammer, sure, but our hammer hasn't had to go as hard as you've seen in many other nations.
Chris Richardson from Rich Insight. Talk to you soon. Thanks.
Thanks.